gives me no pleasure to say what I'm about to say because I worked with Pete Hegseth for 7 or 8 years at Fox News. This is an act of a war crime, ordering survivors who the law requires be rescued instead to be murdered. There's absolutely no legal basis for it. Everybody along the line who did it, from the Secretary of Defense to the Admiral to the people who actually pulled the trigger, should be prosecuted for a war crime for killing these 2 people.
Normally, you would say all press is good press. But when it comes to the Wall Street Journal and the hit piece it decided to have on Pete Hegseth, not sure even Hegseth would say this was good. The Wall Street Journal, the most conservative leading newspaper owned by Rupert Murdoch himself, on the desk of pretty much every Republican lawmaker, calling out Hegseth for committing war crimes.
I have 12 seconds. Mr. Secretary, I don't say this lightly. I have to say this on the record. I think your tenure as Secretary of Defense has been shameful and weak, and you should resign.
The Wall Street Journal piece doesn't just make the case that what Hegseth did with this double tap strike in the Caribbean, most likely illegal, most likely something that he was involved in. But they also make the case for the fact that this was a long time coming, that when he led troops while he was in active service, he directed them to not obey the law, that they shouldn't only have lethal force if the person was armed, but if they felt they needed to. They lay out the case as this is who he is. One of the first lines in the article is, quote, "This controversy was a long time coming." Not exactly something you want to hear if you're Hegseth and you know that the world is watching and wondering whether or not your actions constitute war crimes. In fact, it was just reported not that long ago by Reuters that an insider told the paper that Trump is very worried that the International Criminal Court will prosecute him and J.D. Vance and Hegseth. Evidently, they're working behind the scenes in order to try to convince allies and even the court itself to grant immunity, to make it clear they don't have jurisdiction over Trump and Hegseth and J.D. Vance. For all their bluster in front of the public about this being legal, they are clearly very scared that their actions are illegal and war crimes. And this is why they are trying to get the rules of the International Criminal Court changed. Certainly Murdoch knows this. Certainly the Wall Street Journal knows this. And instead of trying to write an article that may somehow defend what they did, they decided instead to write a piece that shows that the actions that were taken that day weren't just spur-of-the-moment actions, but were actually part of Hegseth's philosophy that were years in the making.
Told not to shoot. I know in my own, even in 2005, 2006 ROE, it was incredibly arduous toward the idea of absolutely decimating our military. So as a result, it feels like the wars keep going and keep going, because we're not doing what we did in Japan. We did that then because we had barrel-chested men saying we're going to win this war. And now we've got a lot of lawyers out there saying,
Is this a military problem or a society problem? Because
I think it's both.
We do not have the appetite. The American population does not have the appetite to understand what it means to win a war.
I don't think Mark Milley has an appetite to win a war.
The article points out what Hegseth said about the fact that this was somehow a legal strike, even though he says also that he didn't direct it. But the article says, quote, "But Hegseth's remarks left a lot of questions unanswered," end quote. It also went on to quote the Defense Department War Manual that makes it very clear that a shipwrecked person does not constitute a threat, and so there shouldn't be lethal force on it. And then perhaps even more telling than anything else, they give Rand Paul the last word in the article. That Rand Paul who has been going on with a media press tour over and over and over, talking about the fact he doesn't want the U.S. to go to war with Venezuela, that he thinks that these things constitute war crimes or illegal. And they decide to give him the last words. They quote him as saying, quote, "Looks like they're throwing him under the bus," says Rand Paul. He's talking about the Admiral Bradley, which Hegseth is throwing under the bus. He says, "Looks like they're throwing him under the bus." And then they say about Rand Paul, he's often a critic of the administration, and then goes on to say, "But these kind of decisions go all the way to the top. Those are the last words in the article. Rand Paul saying these decisions go all the way to the top. If I were Hegseth, that means Murdoch, Wall Street Journal certainly isn't protecting me. Perhaps they're even trying to fuel actions against me. You know it is bad when the Wall Street Journal is going this far in a piece about whether or not these are war crimes. As world and domestically, the voices are getting louder about these being war crimes.
You don't approve of the boat strikes, we got that. But are you okay with strangling Maduro's cash flow with an oil blockade?
Well, if you want to go to war with another country, our founding fathers anticipated that, and they said that it would be declared by Congress. The power was never given to presidents to begin war. This certainly looks like a massive armada, a massive amount of military force. And if bombs begin dropping on Venezuela, or there's an invasion, or essentially a blockade, which is an act of war, there really should be a vote by Congress. But you can't simply say, oh, we designate these people to be terrorists. Realize that the boats that are being blown up, about 1 in 4 boats that are interdicted by the Coast Guard don't have any drugs on them. So there's a 25% error rate, and there is no evidence these people are armed. We have never in our past decided just to shoot smugglers who are unarmed without even proof that they're smuggling anything. So I think this is a horrendous thing and should stop. I think it's illegal and immoral.
Do you include the embargo, not the embargo, with the oil tankers, the blockade? You opposed to the blockade as well?
Well, our government says they're just not allowed to sell their oil, so it's illegal according to our laws, but not illegal according to their laws. So I don't like it. I think it's a provocation, and I think it's a prelude to war. I think war should be something we do in self-defense when we have to go to war, when we were attacked on 9/11, when we were attacked in World War II. But for the most part, these wars of choice or wars of offense, I don't think are a good idea. I mean, I'm not for sending the kids I know in the military, I'm not for sending them down there to die for oil. The president announced the other day he's going back there to seize our land, our oil, and they've been ripping us off by taking our oil. That made no sense at all. And somebody, before you go to war, ought to at least say or explain what they mean by they're saying the Venezuelans are stealing our oil. What do they mean by that kind of comment?
Now, Trump and Hegseth, of course, have flip-flopped a million times about whether or not they plan on releasing the double tap strike, the part that killed the 2 survivors. The latest is saying they're not. Of course they're not, because this is evidence exhibit number 1, not only for any domestic prosecution, but also international prosecution, because people that have viewed it say that it seems like a war crime, and based on the facts we're all hearing, it sounds like a war crime. And here is the issue that is so important, because we know that DOJ issued a memo over the summer saying that these cartel strikes were legal, and they tried to come up with some sort of basis. They said that the U.S. is at war with cartels, not because they are bringing drugs into the country, but they're selling drugs in order to fuel a violent campaign against the United States. This nonsensical argument will not also protect them from any actual crimes they're committing in the Caribbean when it has to do with being court-martialed. Because being court-martialed means that you are subject to military law. The Department of Justice memo may apply for any federal prosecution, but not for court-martial. This is why the Wall Street Journal quoted the manual, the Department of Defense manual. There's other manuals. Army has their own manual. The Navy has their own manual. These are the primary legal source that is used to determine whether or not a military officer conducted an illegal action. We know this because this isn't the first time soldiers or officers have had to face consequences from their actions, as we know with the Abu Ghraib torture cases. There was a very similar DOJ 2002 memo that said that enhanced interrogation was legal. And sure enough, when the lower level soldiers were court-martialed, they tried to use that as part of their defense. But the problem is the Army handbook at the time takes precedent because you are serving under the handbook of whatever you are serving, Army, Department of Defense, broader handbook, Navy. The DOJ memo is not the law, is not the most important primary handbook. Sad fact is, though, it was usually these lower level officers that get court-martialed, as we're seeing in real time. Trump and Hegseth completely tried to pass the buck to Admiral Bradley. Interestingly, as we know, there were 2 survivors on a different attack about a month later. And that was the same day that Admiral Alvin Hoseley, announced his retirement. Is it a coincidence? Hopefully, at some point after his retirement ends, he can speak publicly. Is it possible that perhaps there was another order to kill those survivors and he decided not to carry it out but resign instead? Or was it just coincidence? Why allow survivors then, but not the first time around? We'll see. Hopefully more is revealed. But the fact is even with that double strike, that alone has created legal liability, criminal liability for Hegseth. And this is obviously why they don't want that tape released. Also because, as I said before, the international community could very well prosecute, even if they do not prosecute here in the U.S.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to add the MeidasTouch podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts for new updates every single day.